Hello, this is Alan Gassman, and welcome to the second presentation given for Ketterling Health. This one is by far the best. Jonathan Blottmacher speaking on blockchain, crypto, NFT, and estate planning. I'm here, obviously, as you can see, with Jonathan Blottmacher and Rick Thie. Jonathan Blottmacher being the greatest estate planner in the United States, and Rick Thie being the executive director of the Foundation for Ketterling Health for Ketterling Health. So just a little bit of shameless self-promotion to begin with. I just want to mention I've got a calendar here, and we hope that you'll join us October 18th, December 15th, February 23rd, April 20 for these nice little half-hour webinars. Let us know anything you would like to have addressed in these webinars, and then please make plans to come into the Dayton, Ohio airport. It's a 20-minute drive then to the Ketterling Health Conference, May 18, 2023. This is the beginning of a wonderful new program. These are 7 not-for-profit hospitals doing great things in a great community. Rick, anything to say, and would you like to introduce Jonathan?
Yeah, well, as you know, Jonathan needs no introduction. I just say something from a personal standpoint. Every engagement I have with Jonathan, having been in the planning field myself, it's always been enlightening. And anytime there's a tax change or something coming up in those regards, and now we have crypto with technology, you can count on Jonathan being on the cutting edge of that. So I'm just very excited to be here and to invite our Dayton friends in the estate planning community to hear Jonathan today. So thank you, Jonathan, from Kettering Health Foundation for being with us, and we really look forward to a really exciting message today.
Well, thank you very much, Rick. Thank you very much. Very kind of you and Alan with those introductions. Alan, anything more? Let's start. This is a topic. When I first heard about cryptocurrency, then I didn't hear about cryptocurrency. I heard about Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is one of the many types of cryptocurrencies we now have. There are thousands of them now, and I'll briefly mention that. I thought this is nothing but a Ponzi scheme. There's nothing to it. You've got to be crazy. And in fact, recently, this is what some smart people said. Bill Gates said crypto is a fool's errand. He said that within the last 6 months. Warren Buffett said about a year ago, I wouldn't give $25 for all the crypto in the world. Well, I certainly would, because all the crypto in the world is worth about $1 trillion now. Now, one of the things we have to remember in thinking about this, and even though I wrote an article which I regarded as very important, which is cited there in the middle of the page, looking back and looking forward, or looking ahead, preparing your practice for the future, don't get behind the change curve. Well, I did, because I thought crypto, again, wasn't anything. It was just a passing fancy. Nothing would come of it. But I will tell you my own experience. My son was the head of cryptocurrency for New York State. He's a lawyer for a couple of years now. He works for the Bank of New York. And before he took the job with New York State, he called me and said, Dad, I want you to put $30,000 into cryptocurrency. And I said, I might as well be flushing it down the toilet. He said, Dad, trust me. So he went out and bought a variety of different cryptos, not just Bitcoin. And that was about 3 years ago. Now, the good news is that it's now worth $60,000, which is about the best investment experience I've had in the past 3 years. The bad news is I should have sold it out when it was worth $100,000, but it varies tremendously. Now, one of my now deceased partner's friend, Musselman, for which we all owe a word of thanks, Frank was basically the father of word processing. And in 1997, I had him do a presentation. I'm sorry, that was 1987. I had him do a presentation at the Association of the Bar of the City of New York, where he told people about the use of word processing. And, you know, people just shook their heads. And he said at the end, If you don't adopt word processing within the next 5 years, you will no longer be practicing law. And there were hoots and hollers. I got hate mail from that, but of course it's true. Can you imagine going back just with a standard electric typewriter and try to practice law? It would be impossible. Now, to also show you the resistance, both my beloved wife, Betsy, and my dear, brilliant friend, Howard Zarisky, again, smart people, both told me in the 1980s they would never use email. I'm never going to use it. There's no reason for it. Both of them would sooner give up their right hand than lose their ability to use email. We all use it as part of our lives. You can't go anywhere without it. Let's go to our next slide, Alan, if we could. And I think that this is going to be as disruptive as the internet is. And to understand why that's so, we have to understand cryptography, we have to understand money, and we have to understand the blockchain. Let's go to our next slide, Alan, if we could. Now, when you think about it, back, 10,000 years ago or so, there was no money, and people, let's say I had 2 rabbits, and Alan came to me and said, I want one of your rabbits. And I said, well, what do you have? And Alan might or might not have something that I wanted in exchange. But if he didn't have something I wanted in exchange, he couldn't get my rabbit. And in fact, that is really true. But all of a sudden, human beings who are very, very clever beings came up with tokens. If you grew up on the East Coast, you learned in grammar school about wampum, which was a bunch of beads which were put on a string, and it was used as a medium of exchange. And people used arrows. Silver came on very early. Beaver pelts in colonial days was a form of exchange, and gold. In fact, Alan, do you know why we call dollars bucks? You have 10 bucks. Would you lend me 50 bucks? It's because in colonial days, buck skins, the skin of a deer, was used as a medium of exchange. Now, we say something is as good as gold. Now, why do we think gold is so good? You can't eat it. You can't wear it. It won't protect you against the elements. But why do we want it? Well, we want it because it represents a medium of exchange, and it's based upon the belief that it will be accepted for other things in the future. And it's also a way to store wealth. And here's some questions just to think for yourself. Rick, why would you want a real Picasso when you can buy a perfect copy of that Picasso for $100? And why did a wicker basket belonging to Jackie Onassis sell for $9,000? A wicker basket. You couldn't prove it belonged to Jackie Onassis, but that's what people paid for it at the big auction. And how about a Mickey Mantle rookie card, Alan? $5 million. And you can get a perfect copy of it, looks the same, smells the same, tastes the same. It's the perception of human value, the human perception of what is value. That's kind of a little history of money, but it goes there all the time, all the way. Now let's go to our next slide, Alan, if we could. The gold standard, the problem was gold became too heavy. And especially when you began to have international trading, which the Dutch really began in the 17th century, you really couldn't transfer it around. So they came up with a concept called banknotes, which are backed by gold and silver. In fact, Alan, you may be old enough to remember there used to be currency in the United States called silver certificates. And you could turn in that piece of paper. You could turn it in for silver. You could actually go to the mint, the federal mint, and say, I want silver. Now, the federal government got rid of that, but that was it's done. Now, we used to be backed, our dollar used to be backed by the gold standard. Used to be that you could go in and get gold for your federal notes. But Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard, and the world didn't collapse. But all the money in the world today, whether it's US dollars, whether it's Swiss francs, whether it's euros, whether it's the Russian ruble, it's all fiat money, meaning it's not backed by anything other than the government saying you have to accept this in exchange for goods and services. And in fact, if you take a dollar or any kind of currency out of your wallet, you will see right there, it says, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. Well, do you know that that also was on Confederate dollars? This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. Well, guess what happened towards the end of the Confederacy? The value of Confederate dollars went to zero. And that's just the way it is, because every fiat currency, that is a currency only backed by some government saying you have to accept this in payment of debts, public and private. You have to accept it in exchange for things. Every one of those to this date has failed. Now, the US currency has been accepted now since basically since 1970, when Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. But you know, every currency, whether it's Canadian, it's Russian, whether it's Chinese, whether it's euros, it's only backed by the word of the government. It's nothing that you can get for it. Now, take a look at the fourth thing down there. It says, since the end of the gold standard in 1971, the US dollar lost by 2011 over 80% of its purchasing power. Now, that's pretty extraordinary that the dollar has lost 80% of its purchasing power. In other words, something that you would buy for $1 in 1971 would now cost you almost $20 today. And that's really extraordinary. So what is Bitcoin? Well, is it a currency? Bitcoin is a digital asset designed by its inventor, which is a guy named Satoshi Nakamoto, which is probably not the real person who did it. They think it was a group of computer scientists to work as a currency. Well, as you will see, according to the IRS, take a look at Revenue Ruling 2014-21, it's not a currency, but it is now legal tender in El Salvador. So, you know, people say, well, it's not worth anything. And the announcements by the IRS are all premised on the fact that it's not legal currency anywhere in the world. Well, that's not true anymore. A little over a year ago, El Salvador said you could do it here in the United States. And in fact, there are a number of companies now that accept Bitcoin in payment of goods or services. For example, Alan loves Gucci products. Alan has, I think, 15 or 20 Gucci bags. He just loves them, keeps them in his car, keeps them in his home, keeps them in his bedroom, keeps them in his office. And the women in his firm just come in and, ooh, gee, I wish I had one of those, but Alan won't give them away because they're so important to him. Well, Gucci Alan will accept Bitcoin in payment of its products. Now, the attributes of a useful currency are scarcity, divisibility, acceptability, portability, desirability, and resistance to being counterfeited. Now, there's something called stable coins. Is that the future? Well, it has the advantage of lower volatility than the current currencies that have been printed in the Ethernet is there. But keep in mind that most of the money you own, Rick, you don't own dollars. If you have a checking account, Rick, you probably do. You have a bank account, you probably do, but you don't have money in there. You have a relationship with your bank that it will allow you to withdraw it in currency, but you don't have it. And in fact, when you write a check and pay for something, you're not paying for it with US dollars. You're paying for it with a piece of paper, which that person would have to go to the bank and see whether it would accept it in exchange for money. But almost all of what we think of as money today, our bank accounts, our brokerage accounts, none of that represents anything physical. It's just a matter of paper. Let's go to our next slide, Alan, if we could. Now, as I mentioned, these are tokens, and many of you who have been to New York City knew that you got on the subway. Same was true for Philadelphia, other places with subway tokens. And one of Alan's favorites were tokens at Chuck E. Cheese. Remember, you could go in there and you could win tokens and you could turn it in for pizza or other prizes. And now it's owns some virtual property. Tokenization is the process of leveraging blockchain technology. Well, how does that occur? How do we do that? Well, it happens through something called cryptography. Let's go to our next slide if we could, Alan. And I'm going to go through this kind of quickly, but cryptography is derived from the Greek word of hidden or secret. You think of, invisible ink. And cryptography has been around for millennia. And many of you have seen the movie called The Christmas Story, where the hero in that story, a young boy named Ralphie, wanted a secret decoder ring from little orphan Annie. And he finally got the decoder ring, and he took the message, and it said, "Drink more Ovaltine," which was the sponsor of the radio show Little Orphan Annie. But that was it. That was the decoder ring. Now, you've probably also seen a Ranchi Code. And again, that was where you had a device which could only be if you could get it in the right message. One of the most famous uses of cryptography was allegedly by Julius Caesar when he would send messages to his general. Let's go to the next slide, Alan, if we can. And I only want you to put up the first line. Yeah, no, stop. Yeah, first line. When I met my wife, who was she slipped me a note, just like that young woman there is. We were a little older than the two there, but it said NFFU, NUBU, UIF. I had no idea what that meant. But then I thought about Julius Caesar, and what Julius Caesar did was he would send these messages, and his generals knew that what they would do is they would take these words, which were gibberish really, and you would go one letter further in the alphabet. One line, Alan, if you would.
So OGGT.
Go down just one line. Click one more time.
Oh, all right.
Yes. Okay, so the N in that case becomes M. Do it one more time. The F becomes E, because again, you're moving back one at a time. And if you go all the way down to the bottom, it will say,
Wow.
"Meet me at the bar at 7." And that's how I, met my wife. And as they say, that's all history now. But that's what cryptography is. You have something that seems like nonsense. Well, obviously, things are much more sophisticated today, but you're all familiar with cryptography because of, seeing Christmas Story. And also you all know about the Enigma machine, which the Germans used. And when that was finally cracked because the US Navy managed to have a German submarine surface rather than be destroyed, and they went in and they found an Enigma machine and the code book, and that probably shortened the war by at least 1 year. Let's go to our next slide if we could, Alan. Yeah, digital currencies, that's what we have. Now, Bitcoin is a kind of digital currency, but it's also the generic. So when you take a look at MSNBC in the morning or one of the other channels on it, and it shows you what Bitcoin is, that's actually that digital currency. It doesn't talk about the term which describes all of them. There are thousands now, as you'll see, not just Bitcoin, but Ethereum, known as Ether or ETH, USD coin, Cardano, and so on and so forth. But it really was supposed to be a medium of exchange which the government couldn't control, because since the government controls it, all you have to do is to print more money. Now, you don't actually print it, but for example, during the pandemic, when the federal government wanted people to have money because so many people couldn't go to work, they sent them checks. They just printed money. That's what it is. Federal government sends a check out. And what happens because of the law of supply and demand, when you increase the supply of something, its value goes down. That's why the US dollar between 1971 and 2011 it went down by 80% in value. Now it's probably down 90% in value. And as long as the government can control the volume of it, the amount of it, it can control its value. And people who did Bitcoin, the original one, they decided, Satoshi Nakamoto decided, we are going to limit it to no more than 21 million Bitcoins. Now, Bitcoin is, again, it's a digital currency. You may see pictures that it looks like a coin or something. It's not. It's all digital. It doesn't physically exist. And the reason that it's accepted is only because human beings will accept it. It's like, why do people accept gold? Because they believe that other people will accept gold in exchange for other things. Let's go to our next slide, if we could, Alan, please. And now, how does the Bitcoin system work? Well, you install software on your computer and you become a user of what's technically called a node. And each node, each user receives a notice of every Bitcoin transaction that occurs on the network. And it creates a permanent record of everything done with Bitcoin. And every node has its own address. So you become a node, you don't put in your name, but you have a random address, which you have to keep. And there's only one address for each transferor and one address for each transferee, both of whom can remain entirely anonymous. And to make a transfer from one account to another, you have to have a secret or a private key. If you lose that key, you probably lose any hope of saving any money from it. In fact, there's a fellow in Australia who somehow threw his laptop away in a garbage dump. Today, the account would have a value of well over $100 million. In fact, he has told the town that owns the dump that if they will go in and they will find it, he will split it with them. Hasn't happened yet. So that's pretty devastating if that happens. You'll see there's a New York Times article from a little over a year ago about lost passwords lock millionaires out of their Bitcoin fortune. And here, Bitcoin doesn't mean the Bitcoin digital currency, it means any of these digital currencies. Now, if you want to, and what my son did for me, you don't have to have your own account. You can go to an intermediary, a firm like Gemini, which deals with cryptocurrencies. So I don't have it. I don't have any secret number that I have to worry about losing. And one of the things that estate planners have to worry about is if you have a client who comes in and says, I have some digital currency, I have Bitcoin, I have Cardano, whatever it is, in order to access that, they have to have their secret key, their private key. Well, you're going to handle their estate. How are you going to keep a record of that? Well, they don't want a lot of people to have it because maybe if they give you the private key, you can go in and take the money out. And there will be no record about where it went from his account to another account because that other account will be secret as well. So this is a serious problem when you're dealing with it. And one of the ways is, who do you name as your executor? Is your executor going to have access to your Bitcoin account or your digital currency account? And who are you going to trust? Are you going to go to the bank and say, oh, I want you to handle my affairs, you're going to be my executor? Are they going to want to accept your private key? A couple of months ago, my son, again, who ran cryptocurrency for New York State for a couple of years, and I were lecturing out on Long Island, and there were about a dozen people from banks, every place from JP Morgan to JP Morgan to US Trust to a variety of them. And I asked the officers who were there, would you agree to be the executor of the will of someone who owned some sort of digital currency, generically Bitcoin? Every one of them said they wouldn't do it. It was just too frightening. And I said, well, then you can't be the executor. One of the things I've thought about is possibly putting the Bitcoin or the digital currency in a separate trust and not having it taken care of by the main executor. Because if I name, say, the Bank of New York as the executor under my will. And I want them obviously to have access to my Bitcoin account because it's going to be part of my estate. The ownership, if I die, to a trust or to members of my family or to charity, for example. How are we going to handle that? I mean, how does the bank ensure that none of the people at the bank who have access to that are going to take advantage of it and use it for themselves? Because again, once the money is transferred, it will go to another private account and you can't tell where it is. So this is a potential problem. And one of the suggestions that I've had and others had is you have like 40 digits to your private account. Well, maybe what you need is at least 4 people who hold part of that. And maybe you have 8 people, 2 of whom have the same part of that number. If it's a 40-digit number, everybody would have access to 10 of the digits, and you would have 2 people who would have it. Someone dies, you don't lose it, you get someone else to come in, and that probably is about as safe as it can be done today. I have a feeling that there will be ways in which this can be done in the future. Let's go to our next slide, if we could, Alan. Alan, oh, there we are. Yeah, the blockchain, each transaction of blockchain is recorded, hence there's a permanent record of it. Now, blockchain technology can be used for anything. And in fact, basically you have all used blockchain technology in your practices forever. Whenever you have, a list of the client's assets, whenever you do an accounting for an executor or a trustee, you go ahead and you show things that what was owned. They owned this on a certain date, it was sold at another date, and cash came in, and what happened to it. That's a record of it. This is done basically electronically. And for everything with these digital currencies, the blockchain is on an exchange which is recorded, and it's a permanent record that's on the blockchain. Now, the blockchain isn't just used for cryptocurrency, but it can be used for anything: stocks, bonds, land. In fact, you're all in effect aware of it. But that in turn has led to something called non-fungible tokens for unique items like an original painting. Now, you don't get the painting, you only get a digital version of the painting. So you may not have Mickey Mantle's rookie card, have a Mickey Mantle card, but someone would create, and people now have create non-fungible tokens saying, here is a picture of the Mickey Mantle Mickey Mantle first year in the major cards, and you get the only one of those, and you can get that, and that's the way it is. And that's being done, and it's done all the time. And in fact, if you go to our next slide, Alan, the question will be, it's something special. Now, if you take a look at the third one, the second one, people buy real estate in the metaverse. Now, the metaverse is like a pretend version of the world. When I first heard about this, I thought it was kind of crazy, but there were some people who, I'm going to call them kind of social outcasts in their community. And, it was the guy who didn't have friends to play with, or the girl who never had a date. And what they would do is they would create their own universe. And there were games they could actually create, villages, towns, and so on and so forth. And they could place themselves in there and be whatever they want. And what has now happened is to have virtual real estate, where you go in and you buy a unique piece of real estate which doesn't exist. It only exists in the metaverse. And the metaverse, there doesn't have to be one metaverse, there can be lots of metaverses. And in fact, the most expensive virtual real estate is where people want to aggregate, like the virtual home next to Snoop Dogg's virtual house. Snoop Dogg doesn't live there, but it's you can go in and say, I now own the house to the east of Snoop Dogg's virtual house. Now, Snoop Dogg is not really there. The house doesn't really exist. And yet last year, 2021, Investors paid $500 million for virtual real estate, and it's going to be much more this year. And it happens in the metaverse, and you can think about electronic games and like League of Legends. Some of you may know Diana Zadel. Diana Zadel's son is a professional gamer. He plays in something called League of Legends, and he makes a lot of money doing that because people will come in and watch him play. And it's all virtual. It doesn't exist. Could that be our future? Well, I'm going to get to that kind of towards the end. Let's go to our next slide if we could, Alan. Yeah, we don't have time to go through this, but this is a clip from a news presentation about the metaverse and real estate, and it explains that although it seems crazy, there are people who are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars for a virtual home in a virtual place in the metaverse. It's extraordinary. This was on NBC one night, and Alan can get you into that. Now, it's going to have a real impact in the world. You're not going to have middle people or middlemen, as they used to be called, in banking transactions. Because whenever you want to share something, like let's say you want to send a picture or something to someone and through Facebook or TikTok, you're charged for that. By the way, there'll be no more title searches by title companies because it will all be on the blockchain. We will eventually have all remote signatures and notarizations. We're going to have smart contracts. For example, I've done some where people try to get a Kickstarter going because they want to develop something, and I've done that a few times. So I send in my promise to pay if they reach a certain level, and this company, Kickstarter, will keep a record of that. And if at the time runs out, they haven't reached that level of funding, you don't get charged. If they do, then you get charged. And this will be used for bank loans, insurance claims, delivery of goods. And as I mentioned, several merchants, Gucci, Alan's favorite, will accept Bitcoin and Bitcoin debit cards. Let's go to our next slide if we could, Alan. Impact on trusts and estates. Well, you're not going to have to wait 3 days for stock transactions anymore. You'll have a permanent record of the client's assets. Now, there are questions that at least I raise, like in New York, and Alan, I don't know if it's the same in Florida, when someone dies and owns real estate, the will acts as the deed for that. And in fact, a number of times when I had to check title, I had to realize that the owner of that real estate had died, and I had to go to where their will was admitted to probate. And you might have a deed from A to B and B to C, but C then dies. There's not going to be a deed from C to D. It's only going to happen because you have the will, and that's going to happen. That's going to be there. And you're going to have special provisions in your documents. As I said, the banks that listened to the lecture that my son and I said that they didn't want to be an executor. Well, you've got to do it. I mean, this is the future. You're going to have to participate. And what you're going to have to watch for at the bottom there is indemnification language for holding or acquiring digital currency. You're going to have to do something about waivers under the prudent investor rules because of the tremendous volatility of it. You're going to have to allow in-kind distributions, understanding that the IRS has taken the position that virtually any transfer other than a purely gratuitous one, which would include one in will result in a recognition of gain if you have a Bitcoin, a virtual digital currency that's appreciated in value. Let's go to our next slide if we could, Alan. Yeah, one of the questions is how do you value this stuff? Now we have some rules that are very explicit, like if you have a marketable stock, it's the average of the high and the low for the day of the transfer, or weekends is a special rule. But with these digital currencies, there are many exchanges. And it's probable that they will say the major exchange, and people can argue about that, but that's going to happen. So if you have a client who has digital currency, like, again, I own digital currency, so that would have to be valued at the time of my death. And what record do you use? It will probably be the major exchange. But are you going to get wash sales treatment? I don't think so. Under Section 1091, we don't know. By the way, people, Ivan Tabak and Mr. Birdsall came out with an article in 2014, and he called me about it, and we discussed about, could you create a Bitcoin GRAT? The thought being that it's going to either go way up in value or it's going to go down in value. And, they started creating these Bitcoin GRATs with the thought being that if some of them go up in value, you're going to be able to transfer value to loved ones through a GRAT that has been funded with Bitcoin. When Bitcoin, I don't mean the Bitcoin itself, but the generic digital currency. Bridget Crawford, a former colleague of mine at the bank, has written a great article that was in the Indiana Law Review. By the way, that should say 2020, not 2000, on blockchain wills. Now, is cryptocurrency a tangible? Well, if it is, you have questions about where is it going to be taxed? Can you get a charitable deduction for it? Well, is it tangible? There are rules, even if it's not. We just don't know. You'll notice at the bottom, is it a currency? Well, you need to take a look at the Commodity Exchange Act. Now, a couple of senators, one in New York and one in Wyoming, have come up with legislation to try to get some rules on this. And this is a very, very big problem for banks and for exchanges that deal with this, because we don't have rules, and some of the agencies have taken contrary positions, like, is it a currency or is it a tangible? And today we just don't know. So this is an area that you have to be familiar with, but understanding there aren't that many rules. Let's go to our next slide, if we could, Alan. Yep, Alan, yep. The Federal Reserve is considering whether to adopt a digital version of the dollar. The Republican Senator Pat Toomey urged the U.S. to monitor China's digital yuan push through the Olympics. Wyoming has passed a series of law because it thinks it's going to get a lot of business there. Joe Biden has ordered all of the agencies of the federal government to give them information about the benefits and risk of cryptocurrency, but it hasn't really happened and come together yet. So let's go to our next slide, if we could, Alan. Here are some of the terms. You can look at those at your leisure. And Alan, I hope you're going to make these slides available to everybody. And then let's go to our last slide, because these are some of the things that I think are going to happen. Just go, it's going to happen. This is not a passing fancy. It's here. You have to know about it. You have to be aware of it. You have to learn how it's going to affect your client's wealth. In fact, 30% of millennials own some sort of cryptocurrency. 20% of all Americans do. By the way, minorities are more heavily invested in cryptocurrency as a percentage of their wealth than non-minorities in the United States. And the reason they think is that the minorities believe that this is a way that they can possibly catch up. But as you've seen, 3 years ago, my value has doubled, but it was basically threefold, and now it's come back down again. So, it's really kind of a speculation right now. Let's go to our very last slide, Alan, which is some of my things that I think are going to happen. And this really is to deal with the metaverse. The metaverse is going to be extraordinary. And within the next 2 decades, many of us will be spending most of our time in the metaverse. You say, that's crazy, it's not going to happen. Well, watch young children like my young grandchildren. Look at the time they spend watching and participating in video games. And you're going to have virtual reality friends, because you can develop your friends exactly as you want them. And you're also going to have virtual reality romantic partners. There was a movie that came out about 5 years ago called Her. It is worth seeing because it will tell you something I think is going to happen. And the reason you're going to be in the metaverse is you're going to be able to ski, swim, fish, throw a baseball, ride a jumping horse, play on an NFL team. For example, Alan, you want to be an NFL player? You can be one. In the metaverse, you will be one. You're going to be able to dance with Susie Lucci on, that dancing show on TV. And you're even going to be able to fly without a plane in the metaverse. Travel for pleasure will be reduced, I think, because you can go anywhere virtually and you can build a perfect universe for yourself. And I think that will happen. So let's see. I probably won't be alive in 20 years, but if I am, I think all those things will pass. Well, Alan, you told me don't go more than 10 minutes over, so I stopped.
You are just like, you could trisect the angle. I mean, the angle. You're amazing. That was a really good presentation, Jonathan. And I can see I have a lot of retooling to do at the office, especially if I'm going to be living in the metaverse soon and not having to keep time slips anymore.
Well, Alan, it won't be that far off when your time slips are done automatically for you.
Right, right.
Won't that be great?
That will be very nice. Okay, if you have any questions for Jonathan, you can email him. You've got his email address down there at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, jblottmacher, pioneerwealthpartners.com. We really appreciate the opportunity to present to you today. Looking forward to seeing Jonathan and all of you at our subsequent talks. Please put those on your calendar. October 18th, Unique and Creative Charitable Planning Techniques. December 15th, back to the Grandmaster with year-end planning. Then February 23rd, 4 hot topics with solid action items. April 20, asset protection. And then May 18, live in Ohio, where you can go and see where the Wright brothers invented, where the Wright brothers lived, where Kettering invented, where Kettering lived, the best Air Force museum in the world, and more and more. And you get to see Rick Thee. So please put May 18 on your calendar, Jonathan. Please put May 18 on your calendar, attendees.
I have
and
it.
Thank you so much for your support of this fantastic Ketterling health system. Have a great day, and I hope somebody in the metaverse will handle all your time slips for the rest of the day.
Yes,
It will happen.
It will. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right. Thanks again. Take care.